Welcome to Poddy, April 26, 2026. Today we're diving into OpenAI's latest model release, GPT-5.5, which is generating quite a bit of buzz in the AI space. The headlines are making some pretty bold claims, calling it their strongest agentic coding model, their smartest model yet, and apparently it's, quote, no potato. We're going to break down what the actual numbers show, what this agentic coding angle really means, and whether this represents a genuine leap forward or just incremental improvements with better marketing. Let's get into it. So first off, let's talk about what OpenAI is actually claiming here. According to the headlines I'm seeing, GPT 5.5 was released on April 23rd, 2026. That's important because there was some conflicting information floating around, but multiple sources confirmed the 23rd. They're positioning this as their strongest agentic coding model to date, and the big number everyone's talking about is an 82.7% accuracy score on something called Terminal Bench 2.0. This benchmark apparently tests complex command line workflows that require planning, which is interesting because it's not just about understanding code, it's about executing multi-step processes. To put that in context, they're saying this beats Anthropic's Opus 4.7, which scored 69.4%, and it narrowly edges out something called the Mythos preview at 82.0%. What strikes me about these benchmark numbers is the gap between GPT 5.5 and the Opus model. We're talking about a 13-point difference, which is pretty substantial. That's like going from a C+ to an A in performance terms. But here's what's really interesting to me. The comparison with Mythos preview is much tighter, less than a percentage point difference. That tells me we're probably hitting some kind of ceiling on this particular benchmark. And the real differentiation is going to come down to how these models perform in actual development workflows. My take is that benchmark scores are useful for comparison, but the proof is going to be in whether developers actually find this thing helpful for real coding tasks. Now let's talk about this agentic coding angle, because that's really what OpenAI seems to be pushing here. When they say agentic, they're talking about models that can plan and execute complex workflows, not just generate code snippets. The Terminal Bench 2.0 test specifically focuses on command line workflows that require planning, which suggests they're trying to move beyond being a fancy autocomplete tool towards something that can actually manage multi-step development tasks. The headlines mention things like codex agents, context windows, and specialized capabilities. My read is that OpenAI is trying to carve out a defensible position in the developer tools market, where they can charge premium pricing for capabilities that generic models can't match. But here's the thing. An 82.7% success rate still means it's failing almost 1 in 5 complex tasks, which could be pretty problematic in a production environment. One headline that caught my attention is from VentureBeat, saying, GPT 5.5 is here and, quote, it's no potato. I actually love that phrasing because it suggests there was maybe some skepticism about whether this would be a meaningful upgrade or just another incremental bump. The fact that they felt the need to emphasize it's not a potato implies that maybe some recent AI releases have felt a bit underwhelming to people. And honestly, that tracks with what we've seen in the market lately. There's been this pattern of hyped releases that don't quite deliver the revolutionary improvements that the marketing suggests. So the question is GPT 5.5 actually different? Or is this just better marketing around similar incremental gains? The benchmark numbers suggest there might be something real here, but I'm always cautious about getting too excited based on cherry-picked metrics. What's also interesting about this release is the timing. According to the headlines, GPT 5.5 came out roughly 7 weeks after GPT 5.4 launched in early March. So we're looking at a pretty rapid iteration cycle. That's actually strategically significant because it suggests OpenAI is trying to maintain momentum and maybe respond quickly to competitive pressure. The headlines mention that GPT 5.5 delivers benchmark gains in coding, science, and knowledge work, while matching GPT 5.4 latency. That latency part is actually really important because if you're improving performance without sacrificing speed, that's a genuine technical achievement, not just throwing more compute at the problem. But it also makes me wonder if they're rushing releases to stay ahead of the competition, rather than taking the time to really nail the user experience. Now, let's be honest about what we don't know here. Most of these headlines are pretty high level, and we're missing some crucial details about real-world performance. The headlines talk about benchmarks, specs, pricing, and capabilities, but they don't give us much insight into how this thing actually behaves when you're working on a messy codebase or dealing with edge cases. What I'd want to see is how GPT 5.5 performs on actual projects, how it handles unfamiliar frameworks, whether it can maintain context over long programming sessions, and what kinds of errors it makes when it does fail. Because that 17.3% failure rate on Terminal Bench could represent anything from minor syntax errors to completely broken logic, and those have very different implications for practice. From a competitive landscape perspective, this release feels strategically important for OpenAI. The fact that they're specifically calling out comparisons to Anthropic's Opus model suggests the race is getting pretty tight at the top. A 13-point gap over Opus is significant, but only beating Mythos by less than a percentage point. That's basically a statistical tie. It tells me that we're probably hitting some kind of performance ceiling on these particular benchmarks, and the real differentiation is going to come down to specialized use cases and how well these models integrate into actual development workflows. The companies that figure out the tooling and user experience piece are probably going to win, regardless of who has the slightly better benchmark scores. My guess is that's why OpenAI is pushing this agentic narrative so hard. They're trying to differentiate on capabilities rather than just raw performance. Here's what I think is really going on with GPT-5.5. OpenAI is clearly feeling competitive pressure, and they're responding aggressively with rapid releases and bold positioning. The benchmark numbers look genuinely impressive, especially that terminal bench score, and the focus on agentic coding capabilities suggests they're thinking seriously about real-world developer workflows. But I'm going to wait to see some independent testing and real user feedback before declaring this a breakthrough. The rapid iteration cycle is encouraging because it shows they're responding to market feedback. But it also raises questions about whether they're prioritizing speed over depth. If you're a developer, this is definitely worth keeping an eye on. But I'd recommend trying it out on some non-critical projects first to see how it actually performs in your specific workflow. So that's my take on GPT 5.5 numbers look promising. The positioning is smart, but the proof is going to be in the real-world performance. The fact that multiple headlines are emphasizing that it's not a disappointment suggests the bar has been set pretty high for AI releases lately, which is probably healthy for the industry. Keep an eye on how developers actually respond to this thing over the next few weeks, because that's going to tell us a lot more than any benchmark score. As always, do your own research on the underlying technical details if you're planning to integrate this into any serious workflows. Thanks for diving deep with me today, and I'll catch you next time.